Okay, so what I'm going to talk about today is the Hutchison effect, in particular material samples. So what I'm going to start out with is, this is an old video of the Hutchison effect. Now this is 23 minutes long. So I'm not going to play this entire thing. I will jump around a little bit in it. This isn't the one I thought it would be, but so this is a cup of water. Can you guys hear me okay, or is there background noise from the video? No noise. Okay, I didn't share the. Okay, sorry, I'm getting noise on my end. There we go. Okay, so in the late 1970s, early 1980s, George Hathaway and John Hutchison basically used a lot of high voltage electrostatic equipment. It was almost entirely in the electrostatic realm, right? Very little magnetism involved. A lot of Tesla coils, DC offset bias type stuff. And what they found was, as John was able to tune this equipment in his incredibly crowded environment, he was able to do some stuff that was just insane. For instance, this image right here, that is a metal file that is heated cherry red. And it's kind of apparently done it on its own, and they weren't using enough output power in that test to make that happen. So you can see that, I mean, again, it's difficult to tell, but that's basically a piece of steel that's got sparks coming off it. It's cherry red. So that's one example. One of the things that you're going to see in here, you will see stuff move spontaneously. And you guys have probably seen all of this on TV. But this is basically the original Super 8 footage. If you guys are wondering why this footage looks so crummy, much of it was shot originally on Super 8 film, right? These are old film cameras. So it was later transferred to VHS. And then I have some that was restored as well. So what you can see there is a piece of metal that just lifted off, flew around the table. There's another one. That's a block that's flying into the air. These are very heavy pieces of metal, and they're moving around spontaneously. So those are some of the things that we have. Let me fast forward a little bit. So again, a heavy piece of metal moving on its own. I'm not sure if you can see that. It's kind of twisting back and forth. I'm going to fast forward. Here's a good one. Okay. This is a metal wedge. Basically, it looks like the center of mass of this wants to take off the table. It's just a little bit too heavy to lift off completely. That's why it's balancing on that thin edge. So that would be presumably some kind of gravitational effect or something. That's one example. Here's another one. I'll fast forward. I believe that bowl is plastic in this case. It is next to a metal, some kind of a bearing holder or tube or something like that. The bowl is just kind of moving around on its own. And again, this is from all of these different effects. Let me see. The bowling ball, yeah. This one, you guys may have seen this on TV. And what I'll do in a minute here is I'm going to put on a cleaned up version of this. This is the original footage. Yeah, because you can barely even see it. So that is sorry, it's not a bowling ball. That is a cannonball that John had, because he collects stuff like that. I believe that's something like 60 pounds. And at some point, let me see. Yeah, you can barely see it here. It's lifting off the table. 60-pound ball. We're about 30 kilos, right? So that's just lifting off and flying around. Okay. Here we have a cup full of liquid. The liquid starts to bubble and boil. You can see that. Kind of see the bubbling happening there. And for some reason, part of the liquid starts to literally just rise out of the cup. No reason whatsoever. And the cup took off. So whatever it was, it took it all with it. And you know what? I'm gonna stop this video. Let me stop this one, and let me get the other one for you. So this footage was actually transferred to VHS and cleaned up, and then I got this from the film producer many years ago. This has been used in several TV specials. That's a fluorescent bulb that's lighting up on its own. Not that interesting. That's pretty easy to make it happen. He's just using that to test. That is the metal file that's been cleaned. That is a bowl flying up, a bleach bottle that is closed, spontaneously compressing. Drill bits, you saw water lift off. 7-Up bottle lifts off. These are all different materials. That's the cannonball. There was a wrench there. In terms of wattage, John runs all sorts of different things. I believe he runs stuff that's all the way down from 50 watts up to several thousand watts. That's one of the material samples, the knife in the wood in the block. That's another material sample. So what I'm going to do is after this video, I'm going to dig into these material samples a little bit more. That was tinfoil. I think that was ice. I'm not sure. Broom handle. That is a solid steel ingot. If I remember right, that's actually part of an axle that they tested it on. So again, a lot of this footage was shot by George Hathaway. I think John may have shot some of it. But you can see we have all sorts of stuff lifting off and flying around. So I have some links. There we go. That's the end of it. Okay. And in fact, I'm going to paste these links into chat right now. That way I don't forget. I'll put them in there for everyone. So John Hutchison, again, for most of you guys, you probably already know this. John Hutchison has been incredibly well documented by the media. And in fact, probably the biggest issue there is John's work in the media goes back to the 1980s. So that Super 8 footage, he has lots and lots and lots of footage. The links that I pasted in there, I believe that I've been able to collect pretty much all of his Super 8 footage. When you add it all up, there's probably like an hour to 2 hours. And that's longer than it seems because a lot of that's short segments. Some of it's stuff that was captured by various TV crews. And so, like, for instance, in the 1990s, you had a lot of Japanese stuff because the Japanese would send out TV crews to John Hutchison's place. And so it would be on their broadcast. They would get these unique effects. So anyhow, that is that presentation. But I wanted to kind of show you what was there. And let me see. And now mine looks slideshow. There we go. Play from start. Perfect. Okay. So again, slightly disorganized. What I wanted to do was the Hutchison Effect Materials analysis. From in 2005, I went up to John's house in British Columbia, New Westminster, twice. I also went later in 2006, 2007, and I believe 2008 and 9. So I've been to John's place. I've spent probably dozens of hours with him. I've been to his place 4 or 5 times. I was able to see his stuff up front. I also have a lot of acquaintances and colleagues that have gone up there. I tried to study this as closely as I could. I've never personally seen the Hutchison effect. I'll just be upfront about that. But I was able to see the materials effects. He had a 50-gallon drum almost full of various samples that he's tested over the years. So we'll start with aluminum with embedded steel. All of the photos in this, by the way, these are all my photos. I can vouch for them personally. with some of these, I actually ended up with a scratch on my camera lens because I got the camera so close that it actually scratched from the metal. So this is a block of aluminum with embedded wood. So they had a piece of wood that was on top of the aluminum, and it actually sank down into it. So what you can see is they very carefully cut that aluminum piece in half, and inside of it, you can see the wood. So when John let me examine this, you can see I got that camera as close as I humanly possibly could. You can see there's the wood, and you know, the top and the right. Down on the left, I changed my filter a little bit to pick up the wood grain a little bit better. As you can see, there's an indentation in the wood. Actually, I did that with my fingernail. I wanted to make sure that it was soft, and it was. And it wasn't burnt either. You can see that the inside of that wood is embedded in the metal, and it is unburnt, right? Now, aluminum has a pretty high melting point. So to do that that's pretty insane. So this is a perfect example of the jellification. You have two substances that absolutely should not mix together, and they are, and the flammable one is not burned at all. Okay, and let me see. Sorry, I got the title on that one wrong. This is the knife. You saw John holding this one up in some of that TV footage. Again, he hung on to this. I got to examine this very carefully. This is another block of aluminum with an incredibly high melting point, and you have a piece of steel that is completely melted into it. Again, it's that jellification effect. So here are a few different close-up shots. I was trying to kind of show you guys how this looked. Again, what they did here was they used a high-speed saw to cut this in half, and they were able to get mostly right down the edge of the knife. So they cut this, but that's why it looks the way it does. This sank in and jellified, and they literally just sawed the thing in half, and that's kind of what it looks like on the interior. You can see that there's no scorching. There doesn't look to be any heat marks at all. That's very common with his stuff. You'll get lots of jellification and deformation, but you don't get heat marks. There's no like, you don't see any rainbow patterns on the steel or the aluminum, nothing to indicate that it's been, you know, heated or cooled or treated in any way. Okay, here are a few more of the knife. These are just kind of close-up shots of it. This is very solidly embedded in there. We tried to pry it out. It won't fall out. They're not welded together. They're jellified together. Okay, so aluminum bar, jellification, separation. I wanted to show you this one. These are probably out of order a little bit. This is the end of a solid aluminum beam. This is what it looks like after the Hutchison effect. So this beam, again, I held this. This is heavy. This was, I believe, about 3 inches, wide by 2 inches tall. This is not a little toy, right? This was basically structural beam, and as you can see, it has jellified, and you can see that the jellified part almost looks like putty, and I'll show you why in just a moment. Okay, and here are some close-ups of the end, and again, you can see that it's jellified, and this is why it looks like it's been pulled apart, because if you look, if you made something out of Play-Doh, you would expect it to look like that. This is what it started as. This is something that the TV people never showed also. This is something that I found. So this was a single block of aluminum, single beam of aluminum, and it jellified in the middle and puttied apart. And these are the two remaining pieces. It did this on its own. Again, you can see a lot of deformation. What you don't see is a lot of heating marks. You don't see scorch marks. You also don't see tooling marks. It's just did this on its own. And if I remember right, he has video of this happening somewhere. These are some more close-ups of the end. It's pulled apart like putty. So one of the important things that I really wanted to stress for you guys is, and this is what I noticed when we examined this, metals all have crystal domains, right? And it varies, you know, the size and the orientation and all that of these domains in the metals, it varies depending on the metal. But one of the things that I noticed repeatedly with all of Hutchison's samples is the metal domains are very disrupted. They're very screwed up. And you can see in these photos, there's a granularity to it. Hopefully it transmits well enough that you can see that, but you'll be able to see it in the recording. So there is a granularity to the metallic domains that doesn't normally exist. These are created process blocks of structural aluminum, right? But when they're done, the domains are all messed up. Here are some more photos. Again, these are the two pieces. You could see that they've curled a little bit more after they came apart, which is interesting. So after they finished pulling apart, the effect continued for a while. This is an extreme close-up of what I was trying to tell you. Again, I should apologize. This is kind of the limits of where my camera was at. This might have been the one where I scratched the lens. What I was trying to do was show you as closely as possible how those actual domains are messed up inside of the metals from this effect. Here are some more close-ups. Again, you can see this granularity to it. The best way to describe it is almost like sand. It almost has like a sand-like texture to it after it's done. You know, it started out polished, and at the end it almost feels like sandpaper. Okay, and so this you can get in the recording. This is something that was never on TV, actually. John let me photograph these at his house. George Hathaway did spectrographic analysis on these samples. So this is the virgin material. This is what it started as. They took a block of that, they took a sample from that block and tested it. And George found some trace materials there, right? So, and again, you guys can catch this in replay. And I actually have photos of these. Yeah, the photos are linked there, I believe. Yep, they are. Yeah, they're in the Flickr albums. Okay, so this is the affected area. Now, one of the things that you'll notice is, so the aluminum, the ALK, was that potassium? Something. The trace amounts of that have declined substantially, and you have much higher trace amounts of other materials in that affected area. So again, I'm going to back up there. That's what it looked like originally, right? And that's what it looked like after the Hutchison effect changed it. So there was an actual spectrographic change. There was a change in trace elements in this, as well as the domain disruption. Okay, so now I want to go to a steel block. This is one that he let me, again, this was just one of his many samples. You can see that, again, there's a lot of domain disruption here. In this one, it kind of powdered and fell apart into 3 different sections. And I tried to get some close-ups of it. If you'll notice, the granularity is a little bit different in the metallic domains. And I thought that that was interesting. Steel, aluminum, and brass, they have different, they tend to disrupt a little bit differently, I guess. That's the best way to put it. And so in this case, again, this kind of spontaneously fell apart on its own. If I remember right, they did capture this one on film. Okay, so that was pretty straightforward. Oops. And next, I want to go to a steel cylinder. This one has made several TV appearances. Again, if I remember right, this originally was part of an axle, but I could be mistaken. This is if I remember right, a high carbon stainless steel. And you can see lots of erosion. You can see also a little bit of what looks like rust on it. Now, this sample has been around, and John lives near the ocean, so there's the salt air. So it's possible that this corrosion happened after the fact. He let me photograph this. I mean, we're talking 15, 20 years after they actually filmed it. So, but that is what it looked like. And there are 2 halves to this cylinder, and that's important. That's very important to mention. So the reason I mention that is, again, on TV, they would show you the materials disruption. What they wouldn't show you is that these things tend to fall apart starting in the middle, which is probably related to the wavelengths he's using. It doesn't always happen that way. Sometimes it starts at the end. But one of the things that I found from Hutchison's materials, from talking with him, is if he takes a block of aluminum out there, it will start to disrupt in the middle. It's some kind of a waveform reinforcement, and that's something that none of the media people who talked to him ever captured. So again, that's our stainless steel, high carbon steel. There it is, Hutchison stainless steel. Okay, and I don't have the original sample assay for that, but this is what it looked like after the fact. It's saying, oh, no obvious change between, the main body and the affected end. Okay, this one next is a brass bar. This one has also made many TV appearances. This one has been to Japan many times. So brass, you can see the domain disruption appears to be minimal, but the actual sample itself looks, it's completely trashed. It looks like it's been cut with an axe or something, but it hasn't. That all spontaneously happened. Again, if I remember right, this happened on film. If you'll notice, I mentioned that this effect tends to start in the middle. You'll notice that this bar is disrupting starting in the middle. And these are some close-ups of the metallic structure of the brass. And you can see there's not really any heat indicators there. Doesn't look like it's been burned or scorched or blackened. And again, these were just about as close up as I could get it with my camera. So this is the brass sample. This is the virgin material with George Hathaway spectroscopic analysis. And that is the affected area. And once again, you can see the amount of the major impurity changes and the minor impurities are more pronounced. And that was something that apparently happens quite often. So one of the notes that I should make in this is some people have suggested that maybe there's some kind of nuclear transmutation going on inside of Hutchison samples. That has been one of the suggestions. Another suggestion, and I think George may have made this, is that natural impurities in these materials migrate either towards or away from the site of the effect. So when the material jellifies, the impurities congeal, right? Almost like surface tension on water. And so that's another theory. So either there's transmutation happening, right, which conventional science would say is unlikely, especially at those power levels, or alternatively, you have impurities naturally migrating within a jellified substance, the same way that you would have like DNA segments move in agar when they do a DNA test. Okay, so this is another one. They had a penny on top of a block. It sank into the block when it started to jellify, and it sank in. They had it near the middle, and that's where it started to crack at as well. So again, you can see there's not really any indications of tool work or heating going on there. And I tried to get some close-ups. John lives in BC, so of course it's a Canadian penny. Now, at the time, and I'm not sure what year this was either made primarily of copper or primarily of zinc. And it's always going to be a mixture of those two. So you've got copper and zinc mixed in with aluminum, and you can see that the aluminum is in fact adhering to the penny. So you've got two completely separate materials that appear to be bonded to each other. Oops, okay. This isn't particularly notable. This was on the back of that sample. This is the stamp of the manufacturer. John showed this to me, so I wanted to capture it. So basically, whoever manufactured this bar basically put that stamp into it, and that's their trademark. And I think it also shows the purity level or something like that of the material, shows the material type. Okay, and these are some more close-ups of that sample. And again, you can see that penny has melted right into it. Doesn't look like there's any tooling or anything like that. I was able to change the filters a little bit. That particular camera, the camera I was using had some infrared capabilities. So I tried to shoot in both normal and IR to try and pick up a little bit different spectrum. And that's what I got. Okay, and again, a few more shots. I should apologize for having to turn these on edge. They were originally right-sized. You can kind of see from a distance what that looks like. Again, the effect started in the middle of these bars in every single instance. And I find that particularly interesting, right? Especially for people who say, oh, well, it's a hoax, it's this, it's that, it's the other thing. Well, it is interesting to find these notable pieces that no one has reported on. And one of the things that's important is the Hutchison effect either starts at the end or in the middle. And when it comes to these blocks, it seems like it always starts in the middle. And that's almost regardless of the material. The brass started in the middle, you have aluminum starting in the middle, and that round cylinder piece that I showed you, that started in the middle as well. So, okay, so now we have aluminum bar jellification and partial separation. This is kind of a repeat of what you've seen before. This is a separate aluminum bar, except in this case, you can see that the jellification started, it began to spontaneously pull apart and then stopped. Now, what is interesting in this, you may ask yourself, well, okay, are they pulling these apart? Does it turn into a jelly and then him and George touch it? They don't touch it, actually. I've seen clips where these effects happen. You may have as well on TV. This effect will start to happen. It will lift off the table and pull itself apart. So this is not something that they're creating by pulling it apart like putty. It is doing that on its own without any assistance. Again, this is very similar to the other sample that pulled apart completely. This one has only done it partially. You can see significant disruption to those little crystalline metallic domains. You can see what looks like a putty effect happening, and there are, again, no marks of tooling or heating. Okay, a few more shots. Again, my apologies for having to flip some of these on their side. Okay, and actually that's my last slide. That's it for that screen share. So let me see. I'll end my slideshow there. So one of the things I should show you, since I showed you all those photos, you guys can get all of these on Flickr. This is where I loaded these. They've been hiding there for several years. You can see only 68 views since 2012 when I put them up. These are all of the spectrographic analysis that George Hathaway did. Oops. And these are the actual metal samples. This may be interesting for you because there are a lot more than I put in this slideshow. Here, I will maximize this so you guys can see. I did not show you these. If I remember right, this is a piece of tungsten. The reason I didn't show you these is these photos are older. Gary Stevenson gave these to me. These are relatively small. Yeah, you can see that on the screen. So they wouldn't have showed well in the slideshow, but basically they're pieces of tungsten that melted at room temperature. So again, this is just kind of a survey, and the link to this is in chat. Okay, and then let me see. The other thing that we have is, well, I would say go through these and take a look. We have some stuff by Harold Burnt that he shot. I also wanted to run you through the photos really quick. This came out of a much larger file, and I don't have time to run through this today, but let me magnify this up for you. I'll go through them real quick. So you've got John in his apartment. These are mostly from the 2005. I had Mike Schaefer, who comes to this conference sometimes. Mike Schaefer was there. That's Harold Burnt. Harold Burnt used to be the Canadian rep for the Disclosure Project. He passed a few years ago. I had a few other folks who went up as well. This is in 2005. So while we were up there, I also shot 2 hours of interview footage. That's just John goofing around. Again, you have to keep in mind, he's a bit of a practical joker, and he is very much a free spirit. There's Harold, Mike, and actually a colleague that I used to work in the .com industry with. That's Harold's son, Brian. These I can show you guys. Okay, so these are some views from outside of John's apartment. Now, again, if you've seen him on TV, his apartment was legendary, and probably not in a good way. He had the fire marshal over several times. You can see that there are chains. They made him install chains to secure things. And in fact, they had to check the structural integrity because he was on the second or third floor. I think he was on the second floor. And he had enough weight on this thing to probably break through the floor. But fortunately, it was a very heavy duty building. Okay, there's Harold. I'm going to skip around a little bit. Harold was taking photos too. I believe that is a naval antenna of some kind. John would go down to the harbor and they would just give him stuff. That is a machine gun, because in Canada you can buy those and store them at home. That he may have created himself. That's the outside of his lab. Let me see, I'm going to fast forward through some of these. Yeah, so he was on the second floor, I believe, of a 3-story building. I have a lot of repetitive shots in here. It was, at the time, I didn't know I was going to go back up. It was a 2.5 hour drive from Seattle. So actually, I'll start at the beginning here. So that was John's legendary door. His door was on several TV shows as well. You can see his CIA sticker there. I believe John Alexander, as well as some other folks from the CIA, actually showed up. So I think John was not with them, but he was with SRI. This is just some of the equipment. So if you can imagine a 1-bedroom apartment, and these walkways, most of these are like 1 foot to 18 inches wide. Everything is full. A lot of this is just surplus naval equipment. A lot of this stuff was just for show. That's one of the chains they made him install. Now, most of these photos, I should just mention this, most of these are shot in night mode. His lighting really sucked. When he had TV crews come over, the TV crews would bring their own lighting and set it up and trip over each other. And I mean, again, 18-inch walkway is insane. When I did my interview with him, he actually kind of kneeled down and I was like at this weird angle. And then I had the camera in IR mode. And so you can see these are some of the shots. He talked to me for like an hour that way. He had like a cot that was in a corner that was like under a machine that he slept on. So that, if I remember right, that's an old naval compass. Most of this stuff didn't actually do anything. Most of the stuff in John's apartment didn't do anything. What it did do is, if the Hutchison effect is some kind of an electrostatic effect, the big thing to keep in mind is his apartment complicates the area because it re-radiates everything. And so it may be impossible to recreate the Hutchison effect normally because it may come in part from the structural setup of that apartment. And it was really random. I mean, it was a junk shop. So this is I believe that's a Tesla coil. I believe John made one of these. That may be the one that he made. Let me see. There's the compass. There's the Tesla coil. Sorry, I'm losing my spot. That is some broadcast equipment. That's a sideways shot, but you can see the chains securing things. In that case, the chains are securing it to a table that is near the floor. top of the compass, broadcast equipment, broadcast equipment. I wasn't able to shoot everything. I mean, his apartment was pretty insane. And again, just, you know, more toys. And those are the samples. Let me see. I think that was pretty much everything I had for John. Yeah. Yep, that was it. So those are my photos. So yeah, I would say, guys, if you want to watch the whole thing, I'll just pop it up real quick and show you what I have. I should apologize for not being super structured. I've done presentations in the past where I run through them and they're a little bit more coherent than this. I'm just going to show you. This is a half-an-hour interview. I believe I shot 2 of these. I'm not sure if they're both up online. That's Gary Stevenson, who you all know very well. You could see John, he's kind of crouched down. He was actually hiding underneath a piece of metal that was kind of in his walkway. And I had the camera kind of positioned funny. And then we just tried to shoot some, you know, some other stuff as well. My goal going up there was everybody who goes up to John's apartment in New West, all these TV crews, as well as other folks, you had a lot of wealthy people who go up there. They would shoot hours of footage and you only see a minute or two online, you know? And so my goal going up there was I wanted to try and capture what is it like at his apartment, in his lab, with his samples and talking to him. You know, this 1 minute to 2 minute thing is not helpful. It doesn't help you understand what might be happening. So that was the reason that we went up there and did this. And so that's that one. Let me see. So you've already seen the remaster. There are a couple of other interesting ones also. I put these up. This is probably worth watching. So this is, again, Super 8 video. George Hathaway shot this to document here. So this in this video, George is going through and literally describing the different pieces of metal. A few of those, in fact, in front of you, right in front of him, you can see the brass bar. And so a few of those. There are a few there demonstrated that I did not see. John had more that he didn't show me. It was just too busy. That may have been the wedge that was standing on edge. I'm not sure. So George goes through and describes all of those. So that one is probably worth watching if you want to learn more about it. And there was, let me see. I have John Hutchison describing it too, but I am not sure where it is. In those links, this is my other interview with him, if I remember right. Nope, that's not the right one. I shot 2 interviews with him. Here's the other one. Just so you guys kind of know what's in those links that I dropped. And again, this is just talking with John. So he's really good for interviews. He's a talker. John is brilliant, but the thing to keep in mind about John is he is very much a tinkerer. He is not a physicist. And so the physics that he knows comes mostly from other people who have investigated the effect. John's focus has really been on creating it and experimenting with it. And my impression is that it doesn't happen that often for him, right? So there's that. There is one more that's probably worth showing you. I was going to come back to this, but I'll just put it up. I'm not going to fast forward through this all the way. Nope, wrong one. Harold Burnt. This is mostly sound. I'm not even sure if you'll see it. Harold Burnt was at John's house. Again, Harold lived about 20 miles from John. He hung out with John quite often for a period of time. Harold was at John's house filming. And if I remember right, yeah, there you go. There you go. That's the effect. So what's important to notice here This one never made it on TV. He sent this to me. Here, let me see if I'll back it up. Harold was filming. John was experimenting with this effect. Now, what I need to explain is the equipment that's moving there is chained in place, floor to ceiling chains, right? The structural supports. The effect is happening from that tube, that light tube, that cathode ray tube or whatever. They were experimenting with that to see if anything would happen, and they're running different voltages into it. Those equipment racks, you can see they're still vibrating. That's, if I remember right, that's something like 3,000 pounds of equipment. That's like 1.5 tons of equipment. So what Harold actually called me he was so excited. He actually called me and said, "Tim, you're never going to believe what happened." And I was like, "Okay, what?" He goes, "Well," he described the situation. He said, "We're testing this tiny little light. John has this thing hooked up to it. And, you know, this was one of the last times that John did this because the city officials actually got upset with him. They had asked him not to experiment with the Hutchison effect because it was pissing off his neighbors. And he decided to test it just to kind of see what was going on. And they ended up with that. And it shook the racks and in turn shook the whole building.